In Kenya, we witnessed a devastating event. Parliament burned and people died. Desperate voices were silenced in the flames. Where the violence and anger has now undermined the message of the people suffering, whether they are rural voters or urban youth. Where political opportunists can weaponize the violence and further ignore the suffering economic injustice that has gone unheard for decades. Just like the attack on the US Capitol, where lives were lost, Kenya faces its own tragedy. In both cases, the only people who suffered were the working class. On one hand, the youth just trying to be heard. On the other, the police and soldiers just trying to justifiably protect the limited democratic process we are allowed. This is what happens under our neoliberal managed democracy, where the donor class holds the reins of too few parties. It is a quiet, neoliberal and neoconservative equivalent of the party leaders in communism, an elite few controlling the fate of the many without regard for the working class. It is a system where the actions of government serve more than the avarice of the few at the expense of the working class. Around the world, the youth are rising. They lead the charge against policies that threaten their future. They demand a voice in a system that ignores them. They recognize that when they are called lazy and entitled, it is just the class's attack to justify policies that harm the working class, whether they are ultimately called deplorable or ignorant, and the appropriation of terms like woke and DEI as a de facto slur demonstrated by the corporate media for the politicians and corporate interests which they carry water. These cheap and spiteful labels are what facilitate the neglect of the working class to the benefit of the donor class, the effective party leaders of neoliberal socialism for the wealthy that stands in contrast to the social Darwinism they inflict on the working class through engineered scarcity. Where these labels seek to separate the working class from the organization necessary to end Wall Street colonization of representative democracies into neoliberal and neoconservative managed democracy, where your choice is between far-right leaders who are classist and overtly racist and the center-left parties who use classism as their vehicle of dividing people. Leaders unite by listening, not labeling the suffering of the working class and the youth as justification to serve corporate interests. They protest against unjust tax policies on essentials, medical supplies, pads, phones, computers. The government's response to ignore their cries and uphold the interests of the powerful. Rather than listen to their citizens, government resort to force in defense of usurious designs of the IMF and Wall Street. They would rather shoot their own people than work with organizations like the Federation to reduce or eliminate income tax for the working class and address climate change. They would rather see the environment degraded and democracies fall than unite people to address the problems which drive undue profit for the donor class. But you keep people fighting to survive. They do not have the luxury of having freedom to find their highest self when survival is on the line. Our fundamental needs are clear: safety, security, and the ability to provide for our families. When these are threatened, people rise up. At the same time, political leaders use that rage and victim blaming to justify threatening our democratic institutions and civil liberties. This is the foundation of the protests in Kenya. Martin Luther King once said that violence is the language of the unheard. This rings true for protests and movements around the globe. However, as long as people are divided and we turn on each other's families and children, we will never achieve justice for future generations. We will only cause more suffering. The only radicalism that can solve our problems is radical hope and empathy. Even when injustice and anger are present, we must also hear the underlying suffering we all share. Radical hope and empathy are not centrism. They are how we get ourselves past the problems of today for all, not just a select few as politicians often advocate. The World Economic Federation stands with the suffering around the world without regard to race, religion, or creed. Our mission is clear: to fight government corruption, address poverty and climate crisis, challenge corporate monopolies, empower labor, and advocate for universal basic income. We are creating a world where future generations have the democratic and financial means to address problems we have not yet imagined, as well as those we are currently experiencing, through a system that listens, that seeks to understand the fears and the suffering caused by these problems. The Federation will also work against the artificial scarcity, supply chain disruptions, and other factors that are part of the failures of the current system, which is essentially neo-mercantilism branded as capitalism. We work to address the root causes of suffering: corruption, rigged economies, inadequate social safety nets, and environmental degradation. By providing financial stability and empowering individuals, we help build resilient communities ready to thrive. These protests are part of a global wave of movements. Inspired by their peers worldwide, Kenyan youth stand firm, demanding accountability and better policies from politicians that avoid both at great cost to their people. This is not just about protests, it's about human dignity. It's about a future where no one is left behind, where every child has a chance to thrive, and where individual voices are heard by the economy and the free market can thrive. The World Economic Federation believes in a world where everyone has access to basic needs and opportunities for a better life. We must unite and stand with those who work against unjust taxation and unresponsive, corrupt systems. This is a fight for humanity, for dignity, and for a future free from the shackles of corruption and corporate control. Join us in our mission to shape a better world. Together, we can overcome the failures of governance and build a future where everyone has a chance to thrive. Whether in Kenya, America, or anywhere else, we must recognize that our struggles are connected as the cause is the same system. We must reject the labels and the division. We are all colonized, and we must work together for our children's liberation. Don't forget that in a managed democracy, there is no incentive to respond to the needs of the people, because if they solve our current problems, they would have nothing to divide us and run campaigns on. In contrast, the Federation does not run from the problems, but instead works to fix them. The Federation does not seek to divide, but instead works to unite people, meeting people's needs through representative, ranked choice democracy, and constant community feedback. This is made possible by social media technology that is not weaponized against the working class and their privacy as it is today. The World Economic Federation, working for a just and equitable world through real representative democracy and real capitalism. Taxation of the working class without representation or compassion under managed democracy is colonialism. Your suffering should not be the basis of your leaders' power to overthrow the democratic experiment. Join us today and help us change the game.